What is going on, you guys? My name is Matt, and it's looking a little bit empty here right now. Let's change that. First off, let's add the top 10 list for air value increases. Next, let's add the card information, which includes sale price and information about the error. We can't forget about the error card. And let's put the non-error card in here so you can compare the two cards. Also, can't forget the subscriber count, and make sure you subscribe. Two things before we get started here. This week is Miscut Mayhem week. A lot of the cards that I saw have crazy error value increases, and they were crazy miscuts. So above me, you're going to see that there is a tally to keep track of all of the non-miscuts this week and their error value increases. And I'm going to compare that against the miscuts that are in the top 10. And I have not done the math yet, so I'm curious to see which team wins. The second thing is I have a link to all of the error cards that were sold this week. It's just a simple search. And if you use that link, I get a small percentage of the sale if you do end up buying something. So if you want to support the channel, please check that out. All right, kicking things off this week, we have a Haunter from Fossil set with the blue stain error. You can see the blue ink smear on the right of the holo there. It is to the right of Haunter and is on the art box a little bit as well. And one thing I found interesting is some of the errors don't actually go all the way to the holo box there. And with the angle that a lot of photos are taken on eBay, it might be difficult to tell if this is an actual error or not. That's why I'm a big advocate for taking more than two photos, just a front and a back photo of the card on eBay. You got to give the buyer a little bit more information before they purchase it. But a very cool card, an absolute classic in the error community. And this card was listed for $135, but had a best accepted offer price of $79.99. Next up, we have a Featherball Trainer card from Astral Radiance with a absolute severe miscut. You can see the left side of the card, you got a good portion of the gold border between two of the cards there. And on the bottom left, you have two alignment dots right next to each other. Now, one thing with this, if you see two alignment dots on the card, that is very rare. But if you see them right next to each other, that is very, very rare. So absolute cool card, and that was definitely reflected in the price here. This sold for $55 this week. And typically this card goes for around 99 cents. So that leaves the error value increase at 5,456%, which is number 4 on our list of error value increases. Next up, we have a Charizard Spirit Link from XY Evolutions with an obstruction error. Pretty hard to miss this one. You can see a large white circle right to the right of that black Charizard there. And I always like an error that just stands out. You know, something you have to kind of hunt for, that's cool and all, but if you have one that's just kind of in your face, I usually prefer that. And this card sold for $31.67 and had an error value increase of 1,682%. But did not make the top 10 this week. That shows how strong of a top 10 we have this week. Next up, we have a Clefable from Jungle set with a miscut. You can see the alignment dot in the bottom right corner, and I think it's pretty apparent that Clefable has been doing a lot of right-handed curls. Imagine if you're Clefable, you're working out that right side. You got to work on the left more because you're definitely a little bit lopsided. Very, very cool card, and this card sold for $45.50 this week. Next up, we have a first edition Dark Dragonite from Team Rocket set with the no holo error. So bottom right of the card, it should say 2282, but it actually says 582, which was reserved for the holo version of this card. But one of these cards made it on the uncut sheet before it was cut up and got distributed. And this sold for a lot of money. A PSA 7 sold for $2,500. Now let's compare that to, let's say, a first edition base set Blastoise. That goes for $1,400. So a first edition base set Blastoise goes for $1,400 at PSA 7. This must be the most expensive non-holo error that we see around. That's just absolutely crazy. So you can see this card sold for $2,538.60 this week. It had an error value increase of 6,248%, which puts it at number 3 this week on our list of EVI. Next up, we have a Shining Magikarp from Neo Revelation, and this is a double holo variant. Now, each double holo from this set there's different ways to tell how it's a double hollow. And with this one, you can see that I would say there's a lot more bubbles in the water. You can see the hollow is a lot more apparent and is covering up the other Magikarps there. But also, again, I'm going to be harping on this a lot this week. Just how you can see on the left card, the non-error card, if you shoot it straight on, it looks like it's not hollow at all. So, again, angles matter, and this is definitely a double hollow error, but I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Yes, it's a double hollow error. It's very cool, and this card sold for $369 this week. All right, next up, guys, thoughts and prayers. Here we have a first edition Electrode from Jungle Set with the artwork error. If you are familiar with this card, they used the base set artwork for the Jungle card, but every single card that was printed for this has this error. I know that price charting lists this error at $28 per card, but I personally have gotten this card for $3. So I think paying $30 is definitely paying a premium for this card, and that's why we're doing thoughts and prayers this week. But I like the card, it's just not worth $30. Next up, we have a first edition Pinsir from Jungle Set, graded in a PSA 8, and this has the scratch error. If you look above the first edition symbol, there is a scratch that looks like someone kind of scratched out with a coin. This is a repeating error, and it didn't sell for as much as I thought it would this week. You can see in the PSA 8, this sold for $76. So it had a 13% error value increase over the non-error PSA 8. And I don't know if I'm happy or sad about this. You know, I always want to see a card sell for a lot because it raises the EVI and just makes it more interesting. But also, I like to see people get a deal, too. I guess that's me just being over-empathetic to both parties. But either way, it's a very, very cool card. It's a very high grade and didn't sell for as much as I thought it would. Next up, we have a CGC9 Full Star Lair filler card. So on every uncut sheet, there are a couple filler cards just to kind of fill out the rest of the spaces if the number of Pokemon cards don't line up. And these are usually supposed to be thrown out, but sometimes they end up in packs. And sometimes those are full hollow layers or the full star layers. Very, very interesting card. And you can see this one sold for quite a bit of money just for a filler card that was meant to be thrown away. This one sold for $299.20 this week. Next up, we have a Ghastly Reverse Hollow from XY Evolutions with the misalignment error. So the difference between misalignment and miscut is misalignment is where just one of the sides is completely off and the other side is normal. You can see the front of this card is very normal and the back of the card is a little bit weird. And I always write notes for each of the cards before I film here, and my notes were fat bottom and alignment dot. You can see it has that fat bottom. It has another card on the bottom of it, and also there is a white alignment dot in the bottom left corner there. And this card sold for a lot more than the non-error version. This card sold for $40.89, which gives it a 3,120% error value increase and is number 8 on our list of error value increases. And we'll also add that to the total of miscuts in the top 10. Next up, we have a Ho-Oh from Neo Revelation with a double hollow error. Now with Ho-Oh, the outer feathers are just covered in the extra foil there. You can see when you compare the two cards, it's definitely apparent that the right is a double hollow error. And in a PSA 4, this card sold for $119 this week. Next up, we have another double hollow error. We have a Houndoom from Neo Revelation with the double hollow. With this one, you can tell because the whitening around Houndoom is not there. So there's usually kind of like a white border around Houndoom there, and that is missing on the double hollow variant. And another thing that was apparent to me is the swirl on the right next to Houndoom. Now, I'm not sure how much a swirl really adds to the premium of a card, but I used to kind of make fun of them a little bit. People would always be like, I'm a swirl collector, and I thought, that's kind of stupid. I also thought the same thing about printer hickeys when I first got into error cards. I thought, well, why would you want that? That's just a stupid little mark on the card. And now I absolutely love them. And here I am coming around to swirls as well. So I guess maybe I might become a swirl collector. I think it would be interesting to kind of have all the different cards lined up and have a swirl in each one of them. But I need more money to be able to purchase cards with swirls on them, which is a great segue to remind you to subscribe to my channel. Shameless promotions aside, this card sold for $175, and pay attention to the EVI here. This had a 132% error value increase. And the reason I say that is because we have a first edition Houndoom with a double hollow error, and this EVI is 688%. Now this card got graded a PSA 8 and sold for $1,800. So you can see the EVI went way up because it was a first edition and because it was a higher grade. I don't know what the correlation is there between that. You know, if just obviously there are less PSA 8s than PSA 7s, and first editions are more rare too, so the jump just makes sense. But that is a lot of money for a Pokemon card. Very, very cool. And also we got a swirl on the left of Houndoom here. And we go from first edition PSA 8 to a standard edition PSA 1. We have a PSA 1 double hollow Shining Gyarados here. And I'm going to be honest, I have a hard time telling that this is double hollow. Again, that could just be because of the angle of the photo. But I think things are just a little bit darker. And I think, again, with a different angle, you could see kind of more of the hollow stars showing there. And it's always very weird to see the PSA 1 go for more than a PSA 2. You can see I have the non-error price per grade on the right below 359 here. But this PSA 1 sold for $450 this week. And now we go from PSA 1 to Pop Series 1. We have a Metagross Hollow from Pop Series 1 with a fat bottom miscut. Actually, this can be classified as off-center, not a miscut, because I do not see an alignment dot here. And with that alignment dot missing, I am very shocked to see this card sell for as much as it did. You see it sold for $77.77, especially if you compare that to the Clefable, which is more a vintage miscut than this one. I think that one might have been a little bit more off-center than this one as well. But to see this sell for $77.77 and the non-error price goes for around $4, that's pretty crazy. You can see the EVI is 1,859% and is number 9 this week on error value increases. Next up, we have a Dark Charizard from Team Rocket set with an insufficient ink error. Now, I always thought Dark Charizard was a little too dark. I get that the hollow portion of the card on the left is supposed to be dark, but it looks good in insufficient ink. I actually prefer this quite a bit, so I think this is a very, very cool card. Got graded a CGC 4, and this one sold for $150. And next, we have a card that I was certain was going to be number 1 this week. When I saw a first edition Ivy Pikachu show up for sale, I did not think anyone could beat it. This card sold for $400 this week. If you are unfamiliar with this error, this was just supposed to be a promo card, but there was a batch of them that got released that has the first edition symbol, and you can see it sells for an absolute premium. This card had an EVI of 5,276%. That leaves it at number 5 on our list of error value increases. And I believe the reason this isn't higher is obviously because the non-error price was higher than I thought it was. When it goes for around $7, 5,000 is a crazy EVI, but if that was in the $1 to $2 range, like some of these other cards that are showing up this week, that's where you get it skyrocketing into the 5 figures for the EVI. So very, very interesting card. And I believe this is the first one I've seen in 13 weeks of doing this show. Next up, we have a Leafeon V-Star from Crown Zenith. And this is an insufficient ink error. Now, I really haven't seen this card show up too much. And when I first saw it, I thought, holy crap, this is the coolest insufficient ink ever. Look how dark the eyes are. But again, that is just the trick of having a wrong angle when you take the photo. I guess it's not wrong. It just can be so manipulated and look so different. So I think the insufficient ink is a white ink that is missing, and it makes just different parts of the card not as bright as it should be. Again, I am terrible at pinpointing modern errors. So if you do know the specific insufficient ink that is missing here, please let me know. But a very, very cool card, and a very, very interesting sale price, $69.69. Next up, we have a Mew EX metal card from Pokemon 151 with the inverted back. Now, I think this is just very, very cool that the star of the show is the back of the card here. And to have Pokemon written in gold letters there and kind of have the outer part of the card kind of sticking out a little bit, I think it frames it perfectly, and it is very cool to see an inverted error here. You can see it got a very high grade. It got a Beckett 9 and sold for $350 this week. And typically in a grade 9, this goes for $18.50, which leaves the EVI to 1,792% and is number 10 on our list of error value increases. Next up, we have a CGC10 first edition Machamp with an additional ink error. Now, funny enough, I was just looking up different errors online, and I saw that the additional ink for base set was actually more of a repeating error. There was several different cards in this set that actually have the same error, where it's kind of a screen look on the holo itself. You can see there's the vertical lines. On the Machamp here, it's more apparent right to the right of him, just right sticking on his hip there. And very, very interesting card. And this one sold for a lot less than I thought it would. So a standard CGC10, which is something that Price Charting actually just added to their website, so you can actually see a CGC10 and not just a PSA 10. So a standard CGC10 sells for $518 about. This one sold for $250, so it had a negative 52% EVI. This is the risk you can run when you do an auction and you don't set a minimum accepted price that you want for it, basically. Sometimes you're better off listing it for a high price for a best accepted offer and then let people either match that price or go a little bit lower. I think it's safer. You can kind of get the right value for the card that you're wanting. Next up, we have our boy Rookie Bob, the seller of Holo Bleeds for vintage cards. And he has 2 cards up for sale this week. We have a base set Ninetales with a Holo Bleed, and a pro like Ricky Bob knows how to use the angle of the camera to show off that Holo Bleed. I've seen some people saying they have a Holo Bleed on an eBay listing, and they shoot it straight on, and you can't even see it. Maybe it's like the 5th or 6th photo will finally have a little bit of an angle. But this was the first photo, front and center. Just a gorgeous card, and this card sold for $75 and was just shy of 1,000% for the EVI. Next, we have a first edition Muck from Fossil Set with a Holo Bleed, courtesy of our boy Rookie Bob. And I am shocked this one didn't sell for as much as it did. I guess even the non-error price sells for $63 for a PSA 9. I guess Fossil Set just wasn't as inexpensive as a set as base set, but that shocked me. So yeah, this card in the PSA 9 sold for $85. Next up, we have a few more NFC or not factory cut cards to show here. We have one that has 4 different cards from Neo Genesis, and this card sold for $142.50. And we have a blank foil sheet, which again is not factory cut, but on the back it has that quad back miscut, as it's said in the title here. And I thought this was fitting since I kind of am labeling this episode Miscut Mayhem. I thought having a card that is probably the most miscut you can have was very appropriate. And this card sold for $153.50. Next up, we have a Poniard from Crown Zenith with a severe miscut. So you see we have a alignment dot in the top left corner, and we have the bottom of another card on the top of this card. Now, a few things about this. Since this set is so new, we didn't have CGC pricing for any of the grades yet, so I couldn't really compare to what it should have sold for. But this card sold for $5.50. For a miscut like this, that's pretty inexpensive. And why is CGC labeling this a minor miscut? In my books, this is labeled as a severe miscut because it has another portion of a card on it. I guess we have different standards here. I'd be curious to see CGC's actual reasoning for labeling it a minor miscut and what is classified as a major miscut in their books. I feel like that is definitely a lot rarer, which I get, but yeah, I don't know. I don't agree with it. So yes, $5.50 this week for this card. Next up, we have a Shining Gyarados from Neo Revelation. This is not a double hollow error. I don't know what the heck this error is. So I have included the description from the seller, and he's saying that the hollow extends all the way through the border. I took a very close look at this, and I also had a colleague of mine take a look who is an expert in error Pokemon cards, and we could not see what the heck he was talking about. I don't know why this sold for as much as it did, especially in the back of the card. About every edge of this card is white from fraying, so it's not in good shape. But they must have seen something I didn't see, because there was 2 bidders on this card, and it sold for $451. Non-error price for this card is around $225, and that's assuming that the card's in decent shape. This card is not in good shape. I'm not sure why it sold for as much as it did. Maybe, again, we could chalk this up to bad photos. Maybe if it was better lighting or better angles, we could see the error better, but I did not understand why this sold for as much as it did. Typically, when you see a base set War Turtle sell for $165.50 ungraded, that has an evolution box error. That is not the case for this one. This one has an inverted back and a misalignment on the back as the error. This was somewhat prevalent for all cards throughout base set. It could appear on any card. Obviously, very rare to see, and this is my first time seeing it. Very interesting that it's like kind of a double error where it is misaligned and also inverted. You can see this card sold for $165.50 this week, which leaves the error value increase at 8,520% and is number 2 on our list of error value increases. And yes, I'm classifying this as a miscut because it just kind of fits that theme. Misalignment and miscut is kind of the same thing. So this is going towards team top 10 miscut. Next up, we have a first edition Dragonair with the Rainbow Smear error. So look under Slam, the attack, where it says number. There is a part of number, the U, that is smudged out. And this is a repeating error, and it does not add as much value as I thought it did. So in a PSA 7, this typically goes for around $113 for the non-error version, but this one sold for $155 this week. Next up, we have a Torterra Reverse Hollow with a severe miscut in my books, or a minor miscut according to CGC. We have just about the same situation as the one CGC said minor miscut. We have an alignment dot in the top left corner, and we have the date and all the information of another card on the top of it. Very, very nice card, and you can see the seller was kind of shooting for the moon here. They listed it for $50, but had a best accepted offer price of $20. Next up, we have an Ursa Ring, which I think CGC would classify this as a major miscut. I would classify it as a holy crap miscut, but I also see it's a little bit twisted, so I think my official term is holy crap wonky miscut for this Ursa Ring. You can see it sold for a lot of money, especially compared to the non-error version. This card sold for $38 this week. For a modern card that is just a basic card, that's a lot of money. You can see it has 4 alignment dots. We got 2 on the front on the left and 2 on the back on the right bottom there. And the EVI for this is 3,738%, which is number 7 on our list of error value increases. Next up, we have a Vaporeon V from Evolving Skies with an inverted, misaligned back. I think it's interesting this error occurred way back then. It was prevalent in base set, and then 20 years later, it's still prevalent here in Evolving Skies. Very, very interesting card. You can see this one is very right and bottom heavy, and we have that alignment dot on the back, and also the Pokeball is inverted. And this card sold for $197.40, which gives it around a 1,300% EVI, but is not in the top 10. Next up, we have a Walrein Reverse Hollow with a miscut. You can see we got the alignment dot in the bottom left corner, and this card sold for $16.58. And here we have an evolution box error base set War Turtle. I told you typically when this pops up, it sells for a lot of money, and compared to the non-error version, this one sold for quite a bit. Sold for $90 this week and had an air value increase of 4,515%. Next up, we have a Wuqin with 2 square corners. Now, one thing that I did not know before doing a little bit more research on this is that it's actually a 2-step process to cut a Pokemon card. The first step cuts it right into a square into the size that it is, and then the second step cuts the corners. And so I'd be interested to see what process takes place or what went wrong to leave 2 of the corners square. But I'm glad that sometimes it messes up, because then I can get to talk about the cards I get to talk about. And you can see this card sold for $12 this week. And I'm going to pose one final question to you. Do you think Weedle has ever won anything in its life? Well, now it has. Coming in at number 1 for the error value increase, we have a base set Weedle with an inverted back and also a misaligned back. I find it interesting, these cards were sold by different sellers this week, so I don't know why these popped up, all at the same time. I'm glad they did, though. It made for an interesting top 10. And you can see Weedle sold for $96 this week, which gives it an 8,549% error value increase. And as I said, is number 1 this week for error value increases. I believe it just edged out the base set Wartortle with the inverted and misaligned back. I think it was around a 29% difference here. So very, very interesting card. I love to see this show up. I always love the base set errors. And I think the reason the error value increase was so high was because that Weedle isn't worth much. I think that's pretty funny that $1.11 for the non-error version. So when you get a higher sale price, it just makes that EVI explode. So very interesting way to wrap up the error sales for this week. All right, well, thank you all for watching. Again, use my eBay link if you are wanting to either see the error cards that sold this week or just help out the channel a little bit. I believe it's an affiliate link. I'm still new at this, but if you're going to buy anything on eBay, click that first and purchase it, and I'll get a low percentage of the sales. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week.